Welcome back, everyone. So it's that time of year when people are making all kinds of lists, their top 10 games of the year, etc. And if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I'm not really into that sort of thing, and making any sort of top 10, top 25 video is not something I ever thought I would do. But there is one top list that I am kind of interested in, and I thought it might be sort of fun, even if it's just as arbitrary as any of the other lists. And that is when arcade mods and builds go terribly wrong. Now, if you've ever owned an arcade machine, you've probably worked on an arcade machine, and we all do some silly things at times and make some really stupid mistakes. But these cases are just absolute disasters, and these are people who should have their power tools taken away. So without further ado, here are my top 25 arcade atrocities.
First up, what happens when you put a tiny monitor inside some particle board? Well, you get this sad looking thing. I'm assuming the second joystick is for Robotron, although honestly I'd rather play it with two Atari 5200 controllers taped together. Our next entry has everything you could want in a big, ugly, overbuilt MAME cab, including neon, a widescreen monitor, a second monitor for no apparent reason, and a plexiglass control panel so you can see all the wiring and mounting. And what do you know, most of my favorite arcade games are on the 32X. Winners don't use drugs, but apparently this guy does. Why in the world would you need 12 buttons per player? Ever wanted to ruin a perfectly good piece of furniture by turning it into an arcade machine? Well, this guy did it. If that weren't bad enough, he also put ground effects on it. I can just imagine the hours of fun you'd have sitting hunched over this thing. Not only does this one use generic controllers and a widescreen display for a 4:3 game, it's hideous and it's huge. Why does it need to be this big? Are they hiding bodies in there or something? Peter Criss called, and he wants his plug-and-play back. Seriously though, if you're gonna use a plug-and-play in a TV, just use a plug-and-play in a TV. There's no reason to destroy a perfectly good kick drum and office chair. Although I will say that my ideal viewing height is about 6 inches off the ground. Now, I've been accused of putting the Aero up on a pedestal, but these guys actually put the Aero up on a pedestal. One of the beauties of a candy cab is you can sit down while you play, so why would you change that? They also installed cheap half controls and Primal Rage, one of the worst arcade games ever made. And if this weren't bad enough, they want $1,500 for this thing. This next one has everything you want in a custom-built MAME cab. A tiny monitor, ill-fitting bezel, and improperly mounted joysticks. And honestly, why do you really need 4 players? If you built this cab, you don't have 3 friends. An arcade machine made out of hammered copper? I'm not even sure what to say. At least the scrap metal might be worth something. Arcade Paradise. We actually have 2 versions of this machine, although I prefer the second one with the smaller monitor and the very classy marble contact paper. Next up we have the Trashcade. Now this one has a certain charm, as at least the person who made it kinda knew what they were doing. As a side note, the biggest piece of trash on this whole thing is that crappy X-Arcade controller. Yeah, so this one's definitely a mystery. I don't recall a Scooby-Doo arcade game. Interesting button placement though. Not only do you get to hunch over this one, but player 2 gets to play left-handed. Lisa has a fan to keep her balls cool. If you're gonna put an LCD in your candy cab, at least make sure it's the right aspect ratio. But seriously though, don't put an LCD in your candy cab. Alright, Tomb Raider, one of my favorite arcade games. At least it's in surround sound. Seriously, why does this need to be an arcade cab? Just play the damn console on a regular TV. I never knew Death Smiles was a Super Nintendo game. If you can afford this PCB, you can afford the cab to put it in. Cafeteria table or arcade machine? You be the judge. And don't even get me started on the stick and button placement. Look, I know you love your daughter and you want her to be happy, but she doesn't even like video games, so don't turn your candy cab into a Disney princess machine. In at number 6, we have an all-time classic, Pac-Matt. Is that a control panel or an aircraft carrier? And besides, who doesn't like to play a trackball game while staring at the wall? Tiny speakers, awkward button placement, stepping on the PCB, and it's in a freaking IKEA desk. What's not to love about this one? You know, except for everything. In at number 4, we have another example of how to ruin a perfectly good candy cab. Why just use the stock control panel when you can put some giant monstrosity on it instead? Take note from this. When you try to build a machine that does everything, it actually does nothing well. Whether you're playing Robotron with the player 2 and 3 joysticks that are about 3 feet apart, or having to reach all the way up to the top for that 4-way to try to play Pac-Man, I just can't imagine this being a whole lot of fun. Number 3 comes to us from a Peoria Craigslist ad. So apparently this guy built this giant box around his TV so that, you can sit in there and play games with your knees up against the screen. If that weren't bad enough, he's not actually selling this thing, but you can pay $20 an hour to come sit in this thing with him and play games. Or get raped or whatever. At number 2, we have another classic machine that's been, completely ruined. This guy decided to upgrade his Miss Pac-Man by replacing the monitor with a flat screen and adding a big ugly X-Arcade controller on the front. And of course it's running Mac-Main because why not? And add insult to injury, he even put an Apple logo on the outside. Are you sure you're ready for this? Well, don't say I didn't warn you. In at number 1, we have Mom's Arcade. And what mom wouldn't be happy with this giant hunk of shit? Why just build a simple driving cab when you can have this big wheel of death thing in the middle with 500 different kinds of controls? I also think the tiny horizontal monitor running vertical games is just a great idea. And if you get tired of looking at it, this guy even made it so that you can rotate it around and play games without being able to see them. And this thing has 4 gear shifts. 4! So I hope you enjoyed the countdown, and let this be a lesson that if you're building an arcade machine, just keep it simple. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.